I am glad to welcome you to my channel Sinister Horror Stories. Before we start the story, I would like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. I've been driving trucks for most of my life, but there's one night that haunts me more than any other. You hear stories about strange things on the road, but until something happens to you, it's just that, stories. I wish mine had stayed that way. It was late October, around midnight, and I was hauling a load of timber up north through a part of Maine that even locals called the Dark Stretch. The route took me along Route 11, a long, lonely road that cuts through dense, ancient forests. There's something about those trees. They're taller, darker, like they've seen things that man wasn't meant to see. The moon was full that night, but it didn't do much to cut through the blackness of those woods. The road was slick from a recent rain, and the air was thick with fog that seemed to swallow the world whole. I had the radio on, more for company than anything else. Static hissed through the speakers, broken occasionally by the faint strains of an old country song. I adjusted in my seat, trying to shake off the fatigue that had been creeping in for the last hour. My eyelids felt heavy, and the hum of the engine was almost hypnotic. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a pale blur on the side of the road, barely visible through the fog. My heart skipped a beat, and I gripped the wheel tighter. I've seen deer, raccoons, even the occasional bear dart across the road, but this was different. It was upright, like a person, but not quite. As I got closer, I saw her more clearly, a woman standing by the edge of the road, her clothes soaked through and clinging to her like a second skin. She was barefoot, her hair matted and tangled. But it was her eyes that got me, wide, hollow, reflecting the headlights like a pair of dull marbles. There was something off about her, something that made my skin crawl. She didn't look at me as I passed. She just stared straight ahead like she was looking at something or someone I couldn't see. I kept driving, telling myself it was just some woman who'd wandered too far from home, maybe someone who'd lost her way in the fog. But something nagged at me, a feeling that I couldn't shake. After about a mile, I cursed under my breath and slowed down. I couldn't just leave her out there, not in this cold, not in the middle of nowhere. I turned the rig around, the tires crunching over the wet gravel as I swung back toward where I'd seen her. But when I got there, she was gone. Just like that. I pulled over, the truck idling as I stared into the woods, half expecting her to come stumbling out from the shadows. But the road was empty, the fog thick and unyielding. I don't know how long I sat there listening to the engine rumble, feeling that prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, charged, like it does just before a storm. I was about to give up, turn the truck around again and get the hell out of there, when I heard it. A soft, whispering voice, barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Help me!" I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was coming from the woods, from the darkness beyond the road. I killed the engine, and the silence that followed was deafening. The voice came again, clearer this time, but still soft, almost pleading. "Please, help me." I got out of the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel as I stepped toward the edge of the road. I knew it was a terrible idea. Every instinct in me was screaming to get back in the cab, to floor it and not look back. But something pulled me forward. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was just plain curiosity, but I took a few steps closer to the trees. That's when I saw her again, deeper in the woods, just beyond the first line of trees. She was standing there, still as a statue, her arms hanging limply at her sides. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She was mouthing something, but no sound came out. Then she turned and started walking, disappearing deeper into the forest. Without thinking, I followed her, pushing through the underbrush, the wet branches slapping against my face. The fog was thicker here, swirling around me like a living thing. I could barely see 2 feet in front of me, but I kept going, driven by a force I didn't understand. I don't know how far I walked, maybe 100 yards, maybe more. But suddenly the trees opened up into a small clearing, and there she was, standing at the edge of a shallow pond. The water was black, reflecting the moonlight in a way that made it look like liquid silver. She was staring into it, her back to me, her shoulders hunched. "Miss!" I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge I was there. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when she turned around and I saw her face. It wasn't the face of a woman anymore. It was twisted, grotesque, her eyes sunken and hollow, her skin pale and decayed, like she'd been dead for weeks. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, all that came out was a low, gurgling sound, like the last breath escaping a dying animal. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet and falling to the ground. She didn't move, just kept watching me with those empty eyes, her head cocked to the side like she was trying to understand what I was. Then, slowly, she started to sink. Into the ground, into the pond, I don't know. It was like the earth itself was swallowing her whole, pulling her back into whatever hell she'd come from. I scrambled to my feet and ran, crashing through the trees, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from her. I reached the road, breathless, and practically threw myself into the truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, but I managed, and when the engine roared to life, I floored it, tearing down the road like the devil was on my tail. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, miles down the highway. Even then, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, rotting face, staring back at me. I asked around the next day, tried to find out if anyone knew about a woman who had gone missing in those woods. The locals were quiet, exchanged looks, but nobody said much. Finally, an old man at the diner pulled me aside and told me about a girl who had disappeared along Route 11 about 20 years back. She'd been out there with her boyfriend, and they'd gotten into a fight. She ran off into the woods, and that was the last anyone saw of her. They never found her body, but some folks say she's still out there, lost, looking for someone to help her find her way back. I don't know if it was her I saw that night, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I've never taken that route again, and I never will. There are some places in this world that are better left alone, and the dark stretch of Route 11 is one of them. Thank you for listening to the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Share your impressions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.